The blizzard hit Wheatland, Wyoming, with such fury that Mariah Winters could barely see 3 feet ahead through the whipping snow as she stumbled toward the white clapboard church on the edge of town, her threadbare coat doing nothing to stop the bitter wind from cutting through to her bones. December of 1882 had brought the worst winter storm the territory had seen in 20 years, and Mariah, just 21 years old and barely 6 weeks arrived from Boston, had made the foolish mistake of thinking she could make it from the schoolhouse where she taught to the boarding house before the full force of nature struck. She had been wrong, so terribly wrong. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves 10 minutes ago, and now her legs felt like they were made of lead, each step requiring more effort than the last. The church steeple was just visible through the swirling white, a beacon that promised shelter, but the distance seemed impossibly far. Her foot caught on something buried beneath the snow, and she went down hard on her knees. The impact jolted through her body, but she barely felt it through the numbing cold. She tried to stand, her muscles screaming in protest, but managed only to crawl forward a few more feet before her arms gave out entirely. The snow beneath her cheek felt almost warm compared to the air, and that terrified some distant part of her mind that still functioned properly. She knew what that meant. She had read about it in books. When the cold started feeling warm, death was close. The church steps were right there, just 15 feet away, but they might as well have been 15 miles. Mariah tried to call out, but her voice came as barely a whisper, stolen away instantly by the howling wind. Her eyes began to close despite her efforts to keep them open. This was not how she had imagined her adventure out west would end. She had come to Wyoming to start fresh after her parents passed, to build a new life teaching children on the frontier, to maybe find love in this wild place so different from the stifling society of Boston. Instead, she was going to freeze to death in the snow outside a church, alone and forgotten. Just as darkness began to creep into the edges of her vision, she heard something. A shout, distant but male and urgent. Then the thunder of hoofbeats, closer and closer until they stopped somewhere near her. She felt strong hands grip her shoulders, turning her over, and through her frost-crusted eyelashes she glimpsed a face above her. A man, young, with dark eyes filled with alarm beneath the brim of a snow-covered hat. "Jesus Christ, miss, what are you doing out here?" The voice was deep, roughened by weather and worry. Mariah tried to answer, but her lips would not form words. The man did not wait for a response anyway. She felt herself being lifted, cradled against a solid chest that radiated blessed heat even through layers of leather and wool. The motion of being carried made her head spin, and she let it fall against his shoulder, too weak to hold it upright. "Stay with me now," the man said, his voice rumbling through his chest where her ear pressed. "My place is not far, just stay with me." She was barely aware of being settled onto a horse, of the man mounting behind her and wrapping one strong arm around her middle to hold her secure against him while his other hand controlled the reins. The horse moved forward into the storm, and the man hunched over her, using his larger body to shield her from the worst of the wind. Mariah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the rocking motion of the horse and the warmth of the body pressed against her back. Time became meaningless. It could have been minutes or hours before the horse stopped, and she was being lifted down, carried again, this time up wooden steps that creaked under their combined weight. A door opened, and suddenly the wind stopped its howling assault. The relative quiet was shocking after the constant roar of the blizzard. "Hold on, miss. Just hold on." The man's voice was gentle now, soothing as he carried her deeper into what she dimly registered as a cabin. She heard the clunk of wood being added to a fire, the scrape of metal on stone as he stoked it to greater life. Then she was being lowered onto something soft, a bed or couch, and her frost-covered coat was being carefully unbuttoned. "I need to get you out of these wet clothes," the man said, and she could hear the apology in his voice even through her daze. "You will die if I do not. I will be respectful, I swear it." Mariah tried to nod to indicate consent, but was not sure if she managed the gesture. Her body felt disconnected from her mind, sluggish and unresponsive. She felt him remove her coat, then work at the buttons of her dress with fingers that were surprisingly gentle for their size. He pulled the wet fabric away from her skin, and she heard his sharp intake of breath. "You are frozen clean through," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Damn this storm." Warm, dry fabric replaced her wet undergarments and dress. A nightshirt, she thought, far too large for her and smelling of soap and wood smoke. Then blankets, heavy and blessedly warm, were being layered over her. The man lifted her just long enough to wrap her in what felt like a thick quilt before settling her back down. "Your hands and feet are the worst," he said, still in that gentle tone that seemed at odds with his evident size and strength. "This is going to hurt something fierce when they thaw, but it means they will heal. I am going to warm them slow and careful." Mariah felt him take one of her hands between both of his, rubbing gently, breathing warm air onto her frozen fingers. The sensation started as nothing, then became pins and needles, then graduated to a burning pain that made her gasp and try to pull away. But his grip was firm, not hurtful but unyielding. "I know," he said softly. "I know it hurts, but we have to do this. Breathe through it." He worked on her hands for what felt like an eternity, warming each finger individually, massaging life back into the frozen flesh. Then he moved to her feet, and that pain was even worse. Mariah heard herself whimper despite her best efforts to stay quiet, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. "You are doing good," the man encouraged. "Real good. The pain means healing, just a bit more." By the time feeling had returned fully to all her extremities, Mariah was exhausted from the pain and the cold and the fear. But she was also more fully conscious than she had been since he found her. She opened her eyes properly for the first time and looked at her rescuer. He was kneeling beside the bed, his attention focused on wrapping her feet in soft flannel. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably not more than 25 or 26, with dark brown hair that was still damp from the snow and fell across his forehead. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all strong lines and weathered tan despite the winter season. He wore a simple cotton shirt and denim pants, his outer layers presumably discarded somewhere when they entered. As if feeling her gaze, he looked up and their eyes met properly for the first time. "Welcome back," he said, and a small smile touched his lips. "You gave me a powerful scare out there." "Thank you," Mariah managed, her voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "You saved my life." "Could not very well leave you to freeze," he replied, tying off the flannel around her feet with a neat knot. "Name is Jasper Quinn. This is my ranch about 2 miles west of town." "Mariah Winters," she said. "I teach at the schoolhouse, or I did. I suppose I may have lost the position now." The thought made her want to cry. She had worked so hard to secure that teaching job, had traveled across the country for it. "Why would you lose it?" Jasper asked, standing and moving to the fire to add another log. The cabin was small but well built, she could see now. One large room with the bed she occupied in one corner, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove in another, and a sitting area near the fireplace where Jasper worked. A ladder led to what she assumed was a sleeping loft. Everything was neat and well maintained, surprising for a bachelor dwelling. "I abandoned the children," Mariah said miserably. Left them alone when the storm hit. School lets out at 3, Jasper said, turning back to face her. It is nearly 6 now. The children would have been long gone before the worst of the storm. He paused, studying her face. You are the new teacher from back east. I heard about you at the general store. Walsh, the man who runs the store, his daughter is in your class. Says you are the best teacher they have had in years. Molly Walsh, Mariah asked, recognizing the name. She is a wonderful student, very bright. Takes after her mother, Jasper agreed. He retrieved a tin cup from the kitchen and ladled something hot into it from a pot on the stove. Can you sit up? You need to get something warm in you. With his help, Mariah managed to push herself up against the headboard of the bed, the quilt still wrapped around her. Jasper handed her the cup, and she wrapped her hands around it, savoring the warmth against her palms. The liquid inside was broth, rich with chicken and vegetables, and she sipped it gratefully. How did you find me? She asked between sips. I thought I was completely alone out there. I was heading into town when the storm hit, Jasper explained, settling into a chair he pulled over from the table so he could sit near the bed. Made it about halfway before I realized I needed to turn back. Passed by the church and saw what I thought was a snow drift on the steps. Something made me look twice. His expression grew serious. You are lucky I did. Another few minutes and you would have been buried completely. Mariah shuddered at the thought. I was foolish to try to make it back to the boarding house. I should have stayed at the school or taken shelter in the church. Church is locked on weekdays, Jasper said. Reverend Harrison keeps the only key. You could not have gotten in anyway. Then I definitely would have died, Mariah whispered, the reality of how close she had come to death hitting her fully for the first time. Her hands began to shake, making the broth slosh in the cup. Jasper reached out and steadied her grip, his larger hands covering hers. But you did not. You are here and you are safe. That is what matters. The touch of his hands on hers felt warm and solid and reassuring in a way that made Mariah's heart flutter strangely in her chest. She looked up at him, really seeing him for the first time beyond just her rescuer. There was kindness in his dark eyes and something else too, a loneliness that she recognized because she felt it herself. Thank you, she said again, putting as much feeling into the words as she could. Truly, I owe you my life. You owe me nothing, Jasper replied, but he did not move his hands from where they covered hers. Anyone decent would have done the same. They stayed like that for a long moment, connected by touch and shared warmth and something unnamed that hummed in the air between them. Finally, Jasper cleared his throat and pulled back, standing and moving to the window to peer out at the storm. It is getting worse out there, he said. You will have to stay here until it passes. Could be a day or two before the roads are clear enough to get back to town safely. I could not impose on you like that, Mariah protested, though the thought of going back out into that freezing hell made her stomach turn. It is not an imposition, it is necessity, Jasper said firmly. You go out there before you are fully recovered, and before this storm breaks you will die. Simple as that. He turned to face her. I will sleep in the loft, you keep the bed. I have enough food stored for 2 people to eat for a week if needed. We will be perfectly fine. Mariah wanted to argue further, but she was too exhausted and too cold still, despite the blankets and the fire and the warm broth. Very well, she conceded, but I will help however I can. I am not an invalid. We will see how you feel in the morning, Jasper said, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice. For now, you should rest. Your body has been through a trial. He was right. Even the small effort of sitting up and drinking the broth had tired her. Mariah handed him the empty cup and slid back down under the covers, her head sinking into the pillow. She watched through heavy eyelids as Jasper moved around the cabin, banking the fire to a steady burn, checking the windows to ensure they were sealed against drafts, hanging her dress and coat near the stove to dry. He moved with an easy competence that spoke of a man comfortable in his own space, confident in his abilities. "Jasper," she called softly as he began climbing the ladder to the loft. He paused and looked down at her. "Yes. Why do you have a nightshirt that is clean and ready?" she asked. "You said you live alone." A faint smile crossed his face. "I own more than one shirt, Miss Winters. That is just my spare work shirt. A bit large on you, I admit." "It is perfect," Mariah said, and meant it. She felt safer wrapped in his clothes and his blankets than she had since arriving in Wyoming. "Good night, Jasper." "Good night, Mariah." She fell asleep to the sound of the storm outside and the quiet sounds of him settling into the loft above. And for the first time since her parents died, she did not feel entirely alone in the world. When Mariah woke the next morning, pale sunlight was filtering through the windows and the smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the cabin. She sat up slowly, testing her body. Everything ached, a deep bone weariness that made her feel like she had been trampled by a horse, but she was warm and alive, and the terrible numbness of the cold was gone. Her fingers and toes were tender and slightly swollen but moved properly when she wiggled them. She had been incredibly lucky. Jasper was at the stove, his back to her as he tended the food. He had pulled on a heavy wool shirt against the morning chill and his dark hair was mussed from sleep. As if sensing she was awake, he turned and smiled at her. "Morning. How do you feel?" "Like I froze nearly to death and then was brought back to life," Mariah said honestly. "But much better than last night. Thank you again." "Stop thanking me," Jasper said, but his tone was warm. "You hungry? I have bacon, eggs, and biscuits. Nothing fancy, but it is hot and filling." Mariah's stomach growled in response, making them both laugh. "I suppose that answers that question." "Give me a few minutes to finish cooking and it will be ready," Jasper said. He paused, looking uncertain. "Your dress is dry. I hung it on the line near the stove. And I set out a basin of warm water if you want to wash up. Privacy curtain is behind you." Mariah looked and saw he had indeed rigged a curtain across a corner of the room, creating a small private area. "You thought of everything." "Tried to," he said simply, turning back to his cooking. Mariah gathered her dried dress and moved behind the curtain with the basin of water. Her body was stiff and sore as she washed and dressed, but it felt good to be in her own clothes again, to feel more like herself. The dress was wrinkled from its ordeal but clean and dry. She did her best to tame her blonde hair, braiding it back from her face with fingers that were still slightly clumsy from the cold damage. When she emerged, Jasper had set the small table with 2 plates piled high with food and 2 steaming cups of coffee. He had even set out a small jar of preserves for the biscuits. "This looks wonderful," Mariah said sincerely, settling into the chair he held out for her. Such a small gesture of courtesy, but it had been so long since anyone had done anything like that for her. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, both hungry and focused on the food. Mariah could not remember the last time anything had tasted so good. Finally, as the edge came off her hunger, she looked up at Jasper across the table. "Tell me about yourself," she said. "How does a young man end up ranching alone outside Wheatland?" Jasper wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, his expression growing distant. "Came here with my parents and younger sister when I was 16. That was 8 years ago. Father wanted to start a cattle ranch, bought this land and built this cabin. We worked it together for 3 years, building the herd, making something of the place." He paused, pain flickering across his face. "Then fever came through in the winter of '77. Took both my parents and my sister within 2 weeks of each other." "Oh, Jasper," Mariah breathed, her heart clenching. "I am so sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, but she could hear the grief still raw in his voice. "I have been working the ranch alone since then. It is a good living, if a lonely one. I have about 100 head of cattle now, some horses, do all right for myself." "That is impressive," Mariah said and meant it. "Managing a ranch alone at such a young age." He shrugged. "You do what you must. What about you? What brings a proper Boston lady all the way out to Wyoming territory to teach in a one-room schoolhouse?" Mariah wrapped her own hands around her coffee cup, mirroring his gesture. "My parents died too. Last year. My mother had consumption and my father, well, his heart gave out not 3 months after she passed. I think he died of grief as much as anything." She blinked back the tears that suddenly threatened. "I had no other family, no prospects for marriage that interested me. A friend told me about the teaching position here, said the West was a place where people could start over. It sounded like exactly what I needed." "Has it been?" Jasper asked softly. "What you needed?" "I have only been here 6 weeks," Mariah admitted. "But yes, I think so. Or it was until I nearly froze to death." She managed a small smile to show she was making light. "The children are wonderful, so eager to learn. And the town, well, it is different from Boston, rougher, more real somehow. People say what they mean here. Not a lot of time for fancy dancing around subjects when you are trying to survive," Jasper agreed. "Life out here strips away pretense pretty quick." They finished breakfast and Mariah insisted on helping clean up despite Jasper's protests. As she washed the dishes in the basin and he dried them, it felt strangely domestic, comfortable in a way that surprised her. She had known this man less than a day, and yet she felt more at ease with him than she had with anyone in Boston. After the dishes were put away, Jasper checked the windows again. "Storm has passed, but the snow is deep, probably 3 feet or more. I need to go out and check on the stock, make sure they weathered it all right. You should stay inside where it is warm. Can I come with you?" Mariah asked impulsively. "I promise I will stay close and keep bundled up, but I would go mad sitting inside all day after last night." Jasper looked doubtful. "It is very cold out there." "I know cold now," Mariah said. "I respect it. But I also cannot spend the day as a prisoner in this cabin, lovely though it is. Please." He studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. "All right. But you wear my spare coat and my good gloves and my wool scarf, and if I say it is time to go in, we go in. No arguments." "No arguments," Mariah agreed quickly. Jasper bundled her up in his spare winter things, which were far warmer than anything she owned. The coat hung almost to her ankles, and the gloves swallowed her hands, but they were lined with sheepskin and wonderfully warm. He wrapped the wool scarf around her neck and lower face until only her eyes peeked out. "You look like a very small, very round sheep," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "As long as I am a warm sheep," Mariah replied, her voice muffled by the scarf. They stepped out into a world transformed. The storm had covered everything in a thick blanket of pristine white that sparkled in the morning sun. The sky above was a brilliant blue, cloudless and sharp. It was breathtakingly beautiful and also brutally cold. Mariah felt the air burn in her lungs with her first breath, and understood in a visceral way how she had nearly died in this cold. Jasper's barn was about 50 yards from the cabin, a sturdy structure of weathered wood. They trudged through the snow, Jasper breaking trail in front so Mariah could follow in his footsteps. Inside the barn it was warmer, the body heat of the animals taking the edge off the cold. Mariah counted 6 horses in stalls, along with a milk cow and a few chickens roosting in boxes along one wall. "The cattle are out on the range," Jasper explained as he worked, checking each animal and distributing feed. They are hardy enough to weather a storm like this. Find shelter in the gulches and ravines. I will need to ride out in a day or two and check on them properly, but they should be fine. Mariah watched him work, struck by his efficiency and gentleness with the animals. He spoke softly to each horse as he checked them over, running his hands along their legs to check for problems, ensuring they had adequate food and water. This was a man who cared for things, she realized, who took responsibility seriously and did not shirk the hard work required. When the barn work was done, Jasper led her on a short walk around the property. He showed her the smokehouse, the root cellar, the chicken coop that in warmer months housed more birds. His ranch was small compared to some of the larger operations in the territory, he explained, but it was all his and it was paid for free and clear. That is more than most people can say, Mariah observed. You should be proud of what you have built here. I am, Jasper said quietly. It is a good life, just a lonely one. There was something in the way he said it, looking at her as the words left his mouth, that made Mariah's breath catch. She saw in his eyes the same loneliness she felt, the same yearning for connection, for someone to share the burdens and joys of daily life. It would be so easy, she thought, to step closer to him, to let this growing feeling between them become something more. But they had only just met. She barely knew him. It was too fast, too sudden, too improbable. Yet her heart seemed not to care about logic or propriety. Her heart had its own ideas. We should go back inside, Jasper said finally, breaking the moment. You have been out long enough for your first day after freezing. They returned to the cabin and spent the rest of the day in comfortable coexistence. Jasper had books, surprisingly, a whole shelf of them that he said had belonged to his mother. Mariah selected one, a collection of poetry, and settled by the fire to read while Jasper worked on mending some tack that needed repair. They talked occasionally, sharing stories of their lives, but the silence between them was peaceful rather than awkward. As afternoon faded to evening, Jasper made dinner, a hearty stew thick with meat and vegetables. They ate at the table again, and Mariah found herself studying his face in the lamplight, memorizing the angles of it, the way his eyes crinkled slightly when he smiled, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work and dedication. "What are you thinking?" Jasper asked, catching her staring. Mariah felt her cheeks heat. "That I am glad it was you who found me yesterday, that I was very lucky." "I was the lucky one," Jasper said softly. "It gets quiet out here. It is nice having company, having you here." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Mariah set down her spoon, her heart beating faster. "Jasper, I should tell you something. I feel, well, I know this is sudden and probably foolish, but I feel drawn to you, as if I was meant to freeze in that snow so you would find me, so we would meet." Jasper's expression grew serious. "I feel it too," he admitted. "Felt it from the moment I lifted you out of the snow and looked at your face, like something in me recognized something in you." He shook his head. "It does not make sense. We barely know each other." "My head knows that," Mariah agreed. "But my heart seems to have different ideas." They looked at each other across the table, the air between them crackling with possibility and promise. Finally, Jasper stood and walked around to her side. He held out his hand and Mariah took it, letting him draw her to her feet. They stood close, not quite touching but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I do not want to rush you," Jasper said, his voice low and rough. "Do not want to take advantage when you are vulnerable and far from home and dependent on me for shelter." "You are not," Mariah assured him. She reached up with her free hand and touched his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "This is my choice. This feeling is real, however sudden it may be." Jasper turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes never leaving hers. Then may I court you properly. When we get back to town, may I call on you, take you to dinner, get to know you the right way?" "Yes," Mariah said, joy flooding through her. "Yes, I would like that very much." He smiled then, a true smile that lit up his whole face, and Mariah felt her heart turn over in her chest. He was beautiful when he smiled like that, all the loneliness and sadness washed away by happiness. Jasper pulled her closer, slowly giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and when she did not, he lowered his head and kissed her softly. It was gentle and sweet and perfect, his lips warm against hers, his hand cupping her face with infinite tenderness. Mariah sighed into the kiss and let herself melt against him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and Jasper rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since this morning," he confessed. "I have wanted you to," Mariah replied, making him laugh. They spent the rest of the evening talking, sitting together on the bed with blankets around them, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Mariah learned that Jasper wanted to expand his ranch, wanted someday to have one of the biggest herds in the territory. That he loved this land with a fierceness that matched her own love of teaching. That he missed his family every day, but had found purpose in honoring their memory by making the ranch succeed. She told him about Boston, about the strict society rules that had always chafed at her, about her love of reading and learning that had made her an oddity among the other young women of her class. About how she had always felt like she was waiting for something, for some adventure or purpose or person that would make everything make sense. "Maybe you were waiting for Wyoming," Jasper suggested, "for a new life out here." "Maybe I was waiting for you," Mariah said, and felt no embarrassment at the boldness of the statement. It felt true in a way that transcended logic. That night Jasper climbed to the loft as before, but they both did so reluctantly, neither wanting to part. Mariah lay in the bed below and listened to him moving around above her, and felt a contentment she had not known in years. 2 days ago she had been alone and lonely in a boarding house in a strange town. Now she was here, in a cabin with a man who made her heart race, and everything had changed. The next morning dawned clear and cold. After breakfast, Jasper announced that the roads should be passable enough to get her back to town if they went slowly. "I will hitch up the wagon and drive you," he said. "Make sure you get back to the boarding house safely." Mariah nodded, knowing it was necessary but wishing she could stay longer in this cabin, in this bubble of warmth and possibility. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow," Jasper said immediately. "I will come to town tomorrow and call on you properly, if that is all right with Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house." "Mrs. Henderson loves romance," Mariah assured him with a smile. "She will be thrilled." The wagon ride to town took over an hour, the roads deep with snow and treacherous in places. But Jasper drove with confidence, and the sturdy draft horses pulled them steadily onward. When they finally reached the outskirts of Wheatland, Mariah saw people digging out from the storm, shoveling paths between buildings, checking on neighbors. Several people waved as the wagon passed, and Mariah knew by tomorrow the whole town would be talking about her arriving back with Jasper Quinn. Let them talk, she thought. She had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Jasper had saved her life and been a perfect gentleman the entire time. At the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson rushed out before the wagon had fully stopped, her round face creased with worry. "Mariah Winters, we have been worried sick about you. When you did not come home before the storm, we thought the worst." "I am fine, Mrs. Henderson," Mariah assured her as Jasper helped her down from the wagon. "I was caught in the storm near the church, but Mr. Quinn found me and gave me shelter at his ranch until the roads cleared." Mrs. Henderson's eyes sharpened with interest as she looked between them, taking in the way Jasper's hand lingered at Mariah's waist, the way Mariah looked up at him. "Is that so? Well, Mr. Quinn, the town owes you a debt of gratitude. Our teacher is quite precious to us." "It was my honor, madam," Jasper said politely. He looked down at Mariah. "I will see you tomorrow then." "Tomorrow," Mariah confirmed. For dinner, he agreed, and the smile they shared was full of promise. As the wagon pulled away, Mrs. Henderson took Mariah's arm and steered her inside, already bubbling with questions. "Tell me everything. Is he as handsome up close as from a distance? Was he a gentleman? Oh, this is better than any dime novel." Mariah laughed and let herself be pulled into the warm boarding house, but her mind was still on Jasper, on the feeling of his kiss, on the future that suddenly seemed bright and full of possibility. True to his word, Jasper arrived the next afternoon dressed in his best clothes, his dark hair slicked back and smelling of bay rum. Mrs. Henderson answered the door with barely contained glee and ushered him into the parlor where Mariah waited. "You look beautiful," Jasper said, taking in her best dress of deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes. "You look quite handsome yourself," Mariah replied, feeling suddenly shy now that they were back in civilization with its rules and expectations. They went to the hotel restaurant, the fanciest place in Wheatland, and talked over roast beef and potatoes. It felt different than in the cabin, more formal and constrained, but the connection between them was still there, still humming beneath the surface. Over the next few weeks, Jasper courted Mariah properly. He came to town twice a week, taking her to dinner or for walks when the weather permitted, or simply sitting in Mrs. Henderson's parlor talking for hours. He met her students when he picked her up from the schoolhouse, and they loved him immediately, especially when he brought his gentlest horse and offered rides to the braver children. Mariah visited his ranch on Sundays, the one day she did not teach. She learned to ride properly, not the side-saddle nonsense of Boston but true Western riding astride. She helped with chores and cooking, and slowly the cabin began to feel as much like home as the boarding house. More so, if she was honest. The town watched their courtship with interest and approval. Jasper Quinn was well-liked despite his solitary nature, known as honest and hardworking. Mariah Winters had won hearts with her dedication to the children and her kind nature. Together, they made sense in a way that had the older women nodding knowingly and the younger girls sighing with romantic envy. Winter gave way to early spring, the snow melting to reveal the brown prairie grass beneath. On a Sunday in late March, Jasper took Mariah riding out to a high point on his property that overlooked the whole valley. The mountains rose in the distance, still snow-capped and magnificent. The wind was cool but not cold, carrying the first hints of the warmth to come. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Jasper told her as they sat on their horses, side by side. "Come here when I need to think or just when I want to remember how beautiful this land is." "It is beautiful," Mariah agreed. "I can see why you love it." Jasper dismounted and helped her down, then took both her hands in his. His expression was serious, nervous even, and Mariah's heart began to beat faster. "Mariah, I know we have only known each other 4 months. I know by all rights I should wait longer, court you for a year or more like is proper, but I also know my own heart and I know what I want." He took a deep breath. "I want you. As my wife, as my partner, as the person I wake up beside every morning and fall asleep holding every night. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old on this land with you. Will you marry me?" Tears sprang to Mariah's eyes, happy tears that spilled down her cheeks as she smiled up at him. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Jasper Quinn. I think I have loved you since that moment in the snow when you picked me up and told me to stay with you. I will stay with you for the rest of my life, gladly." Jasper whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around as they both laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, pouring 4 months of restrained passion into it, and Mariah kissed him back with equal fervor. This was right. This was what she had been waiting for her whole life without knowing it. They were married in the very church where Jasper had found Mariah collapsed in the snow 4 months earlier. It was a simple ceremony in early May when the prairie had turned green and wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of color. The whole town turned out, cramming into the white clapboard building to witness the union. Mrs. Henderson cried through the entire ceremony. The schoolchildren sat in the front pew and cheered when Reverend Harrison pronounced them man and wife. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing that lasted into the night. Mariah danced until her feet hurt, first with her new husband and then with what seemed like every man in town as was tradition. But her eyes always found Jasper across the room, and his found hers, and the promise in those glances made her blush and count the hours until they could be alone. Finally, as the moon rose high and the celebration began to wind down, Jasper swept her up and carried her out to the wagon amid cheers and well wishes. They drove through the spring night to the ranch, to the cabin that was now their home, and Jasper carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded. Inside, he set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Mariah replied honestly. "I love you so much, Jasper. Thank you for finding me in that snow. Thank you for saving me in every way a person can be saved." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, and kissed her with a tenderness that soon gave way to passion as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, celebrating their union and their love in the cabin where their story had begun. Over the next year, they built their life together. Mariah continued teaching through the rest of that school year, but resigned her position when she discovered she was pregnant in the fall. The pregnancy was not easy, and there were days when she was sick and miserable. But Jasper was endlessly patient and caring, bringing her ginger tea and rubbing her aching back and reading to her when she was too tired to do anything but lie in bed. Their first child, a son, was born on a cold January night in 1884 with the help of the town midwife. Jasper held Mariah's hand through the whole ordeal, and when the baby finally came, squalling and red-faced and perfect, tears streamed down his face. "We have a son," he whispered in wonder. "A son, Mariah." They named him James Quinn after Jasper's father, and from the moment he entered the world he had his parents wrapped around his tiny finger. Mariah had never known she could love something so fiercely, with such totality. Watching Jasper with their son, seeing this strong, rough man reduced to cooing nonsense at an infant, made her fall in love with him all over again. James was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Grace, who had her mother's blonde hair and her father's dark eyes. She was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn observation. Then came another son, Daniel, born in the autumn of 1888, who from his first breath seemed to contain twice the energy of a normal child. The cabin grew crowded with 3 children, and Jasper began work on an addition, expanding the single room into a proper house with a separate bedroom for them and a larger sleeping area that could accommodate the children. He did most of the work himself with help from neighbors, and Mariah watched their home grow with satisfaction. The ranch prospered. Jasper's herd grew to over 300 head, and he took on a hand to help with the work. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Mariah taught the children their letters and numbers at home, and sometimes other ranch children would come by for lessons, keeping her teaching skills sharp. The years passed in the way years do when life is full and good. James grew tall and serious, taking after his father in temperament and his love of the land. Grace proved to have a gift for music, and would play the piano they splurged on for hours, filling the house with melody. Daniel was indeed as energetic as he had seemed in infancy, always into some mischief or adventure, keeping his parents on their toes. In the summer of 1895, when James was 11, Grace 9, and Daniel 6, a fourth child surprised them. Mariah, at 33, had thought her childbearing days were behind her. But when the familiar signs appeared, she visited the doctor in town and returned with the news that they would be adding to their family once more. "I am too old for this," she moaned to Jasper, though her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach even as she complained. "You are perfect," Jasper corrected, pulling her into his arms. "And I love you just as much now as I did that first night in the cabin. More even, because now I know you. Know your strength and your kindness and your fierce love for our family." "Sweet talker," Mariah accused, but she was smiling as she kissed him. Their youngest, a boy they named Thomas, was born in the early spring of 1896. He was the easiest of all their babies, as if understanding that his parents were older now and lacked the stamina of their younger days. He was a happy, placid child who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything. One evening in the fall of 1897, after the children were all asleep, Mariah and Jasper sat on the porch of their expanded house watching the sun set over the prairie. Mariah was 46 now, her blonde hair threaded with silver. Jasper was 41, lines of work and weather etched into his face. But when he looked at her, his eyes still held the same wonder they had held 15 years ago when he pulled her from the snow. "Do you ever think about that day?" Mariah asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "The day you found me." "All the time," Jasper admitted. "Think about how close I came to not seeing you, to riding right past and leaving you there. Think about how my whole life would have been different, empty." "Mine too," Mariah said softly. "I had given up, you know. In that moment before you found me, I had decided to just let go, stop fighting. And then you were there, telling me to stay with you. I have been staying with you ever since." "And will you keep staying?" Jasper asked, though he knew the answer. "For all the years we have left," "For all the years we have left," Mariah confirmed. "And beyond, if such things are possible. I will find you in the next life too, if I can." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the faint sounds of their children, Thomas crying briefly before being soothed, probably by Grace, who had taken to the role of big sister with great seriousness. This was their life, hard-won and cherished, built from a chance meeting in a blizzard and sustained by love and commitment and partnership. "We should go in," Jasper said eventually. "Getting cold out here." "I do not mind the cold anymore," Mariah said. "Not when I know there is warmth waiting inside. Warmth and love and family and home." They went inside together, closing the door against the autumn chill, and in the warm glow of lamplight Jasper pulled Mariah close and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For letting me save you that day. For saying yes when I asked you to marry me. For giving me this life, these children, this home. For everything." Mariah tilted her face up to look at him, seeing in his lined face the young man who had lifted her from the snow, and seeing too all the years they had built together since then. "Thank you for being the man I was waiting for my whole life without knowing it. Thank you for being my home." They kissed softly. a gentle affirmation of vows spoken 15 years earlier and kept faithfully every day since. Then they separated to tend to the evening routines, checking on children, banking the fire, preparing the house for sleep. As Mariah tucked Thomas into his small bed and kissed his forehead, she thought about all the paths her life could have taken. She could have stayed in Boston, could have married one of the acceptable but uninspiring men who had courted her there, could have had a comfortable, boring life in society, or she could have frozen in that snow outside the church, her story ending before it had truly begun. Instead, she had come west, had been saved by a lonely cowboy with kind eyes, had fallen in love fast and hard and true, had built this life full of love and children and purpose. It was not always easy, ranching life. The work was hard, the weather could be brutal, money was sometimes tight. But it was real in a way her old life had never been. It was hers, and it was good, and it was enough. When all the children were settled, Mariah joined Jasper in their bedroom. He was already in bed, waiting for her, and she slipped in beside him as naturally as breathing. They came together in the darkness, their bodies as familiar to each other now as their own, making love with the easy passion of long partnership. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath, Jasper traced lazy patterns on Mariah's bare shoulder. "I love you," he murmured. "We'll never stop loving you." "Good," Mariah replied sleepily, contentment radiating through every fiber of her being. "Because I am not done with you yet. We have years ahead of us still. Years to watch these children grow. Years to grow old together. Years to love each other." "Years to love each other," Jasper repeated, like a promise and a prayer. "I like the sound of that." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, safe and warm and home, and outside the window the Wyoming night was vast and dark and full of stars. The years continued to pass, each one adding to the tapestry of their shared life. James, their eldest, took to ranching with the same dedication his father had shown, and by the time he was 18, he was essentially running the operation alongside Jasper. He was courting a girl from town, the daughter of the blacksmith, and Mariah suspected an engagement announcement would come soon. Grace discovered that, in addition to her musical talent, she had a gift for teaching, and she began helping the new teacher at the school, showing the same patience and dedication Mariah had once shown her students. She was a beautiful young woman at 17, with suitors lining up, but she seemed in no hurry to settle down, enjoying her independence and her work. Daniel, true to his energetic nature, announced at 15 that he wanted to join the cavalry, wanted to see more of the country and have adventures. It terrified Mariah to think of her reckless son in military service, but she also understood the need for young men to forge their own paths. Jasper spent long hours talking with Daniel about responsibility and duty, preparing him as best he could for the path he had chosen. Thomas, the baby who was now 7, was showing signs of being the scholar of the family. He read voraciously, consuming every book in the house and begging for more whenever anyone went to town. He asked endless questions about everything, driving his siblings to distraction, but delighting his parents with his curiosity. In the spring of 1903, James married his sweetheart Sarah in a ceremony that rivaled Jasper and Mariah's own wedding for community turnout. Jasper gave them a parcel of land adjoining the main ranch to start their own place, and within a year they had built a small house and welcomed the first of what would be many grandchildren, a robust baby girl named Emma. The day Mariah first held her granddaughter, tears streamed down her face. "I never thought I would live to see this," she confessed to Jasper that night. "That day in the snow, I did not think I would live to see another sunrise, much less grandchildren." "But you did," Jasper reminded her gently. You survived. We survived. We built all this together." He gestured around their bedroom, but Mariah knew he meant more than just the physical space. He meant their family, their legacy, the life they had created from nothing but love and determination. Grace eventually did marry, choosing the new doctor who had opened a practice in town. They wed in the summer of 1904 and settled in Wheatland, where Grace continued her teaching and her music while her husband tended to the health of the community. She gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, in 1905, sending Jasper into a panic about having two babies to worry about at once, until Mariah reminded him they had managed to raise 4 children themselves. Daniel did join the cavalry, leaving in 1906 at the age of 18. He wrote regularly at first, letters full of excitement about the places he was seeing and the things he was learning. The letters grew less frequent as the years passed, but he always wrote on Christmas and on his mother's birthday, and they treasured those missives like gold. Thomas proved to be brilliant academically, and with help from his parents and his sister's husband, the doctor. He went to university back east in 1909, the first member of the family to pursue higher education. He studied law and returned to Wyoming in 1913 to open a practice in Cheyenne, though he visited the ranch often, never forgetting his roots. Through it all, through the graduations and weddings and grandchildren and milestones, Jasper and Mariah remained the center, the foundation upon which all else was built. They were partners in the truest sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating triumphs as a team. The ranch continued to prosper, now run primarily by James, with Jasper taking more of an advisory role as he aged. They had good years and bad years, as all ranchers did, but the bad years never broke them because they faced them together. In the winter of 1915, the first blizzard of the season hit Wheatland with a fury reminiscent of that storm 33 years earlier. Jasper and Mariah, now 59 and 64 respectively, sat in their warm house listening to the wind howl outside. The children were all grown and gone to their own homes, though most lived close enough for regular visits. It was just the two of them now, as it had been in the beginning. "Reminds me of the storm that brought you to me," Jasper said, echoing Mariah's own thoughts. "I was just thinking the same thing," Mariah replied. She was sitting in her favorite chair by the fire, knitting while Jasper read the newspaper. Their evening routine, comfortable and familiar. "Hard to believe that was 33 years ago. Sometimes it feels like yesterday." "Sometimes it does," Jasper agreed. "Other times I cannot remember what life was like before you, cannot imagine this house without you in it, cannot picture my days without you in them." Mariah set down her knitting and moved to sit on the arm of his chair. Jasper put aside the newspaper and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer. They sat like that, watching the fire, listening to the storm, content in each other's presence. "We have had a good life," Mariah said softly. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. 4 wonderful children, a growing number of grandchildren, this ranch, this home, each other. It has been enough, more than enough." "It has," Jasper agreed. "And we have years yet ahead of us. We are not so old." "No," Mariah agreed, though she felt her age more these days in the ache of her joints and the slowness of her movements. "Not so old. Just old enough to appreciate what we have, old enough to understand how rare and precious this is, what we built together." They eventually moved to their bed, lying together under quilts Mariah had sewn herself over the years. Outside the storm raged, but inside they were warm and safe, protected by walls Jasper had built with his own hands, surrounded by memories of a life well lived. "I love you," Jasper whispered into the darkness, "just as much now as that first moment, more even." "I love you too," Mariah replied. "Thank you for saving me, Jasper Quinn, for pulling me from that snow and giving me a reason to live. Thank you for this life." "Thank you for saying yes," Jasper countered, "for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy and his rough ranch, for making this place a home." They fell asleep wrapped together, as they had every night for 33 years, and slept peacefully while the storm exhausted itself against their sturdy walls. The years that followed were gentler. Grandchildren multiplied, bringing laughter and chaos to family gatherings. James and Sarah had 5 children eventually, giving Jasper and Mariah a large extended family on the ranch. Grace's twins grew into intelligent, curious teenagers. Daniel, after years in the cavalry, returned to Wyoming in 1918 with a war bride from back east and settled near Cheyenne, working as a foreman on a large ranch. Thomas married late, a fellow lawyer he met in Cheyenne, and they had 2 children in quick succession. Jasper and Mariah, now firmly into their 70s, became the beloved grandparents, the wise elders to whom everyone came for advice and stories. Mariah taught her grandchildren to read just as she had taught their parents. Jasper taught the boys to ride and rope and care for animals, passing down skills he had learned from his own father all those decades ago. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Over 50 people crowded into and around the house that had started as a simple one-room cabin. There was food and music and dancing, and Jasper and Mariah sat like royalty, surrounded by the fruits of their union. 50 years, Mariah marveled, looking at Jasper across the crowded room. He met her eyes and smiled, and in that smile she saw the young man who had saved her, the groom who had promised to love her forever, the father who had cradled their babies, the partner who had stood by her through everything life had thrown at them. As the sun set that evening, Jasper found Mariah on the porch, taking a moment of quiet away from the celebration. He sat beside her and took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. "Thank you for 50 years," he said. "Best years of my life." "Mine too," Mariah agreed. "Sometimes I still think about that girl in the snow, so lost and afraid and ready to give up. I wish I could tell her it would all be all right, that she would be saved and loved and happy beyond measure." "She knows now," Jasper said. "You know now. That is what matters." They sat together watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the prairie stretching out endlessly before them, beautiful and harsh and home. Inside the house, their family laughed and talked and celebrated, 3 generations born from a chance meeting in a blizzard, from a cowboy's kind heart and a teacher's brave spirit. "You have any regrets?" Mariah asked. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Jasper considered the question seriously, as he always did her questions. "No," he said finally. "Not a single one. Every choice led me here to this moment to you. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same," Mariah said. "Even the hard times, even the losses and the struggles. They all made us who we are. They all brought us to this." As darkness fell and the celebration continued inside, they returned to join their family. But first Jasper pulled Mariah close and kissed her softly, a reaffirmation of vows spoken 50 years ago and kept faithfully every day since. "Here is to 50 more," he said with a smile. "I will do my best," Mariah replied, laughing, "though I make no promises about living to 114. "We will take what we are given," Jasper said, "and be grateful for every moment," and they were. They were grateful for every sunrise they witnessed together, every meal shared, every grandchild kissed, every quiet evening by the fire. They were grateful for the life they had built from nothing but love and determination, and a chance encounter in a snowstorm. Mariah passed peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1937 at the age of 76. She went to bed beside Jasper as she had every night for 54 years, and simply did not wake the next morning. Jasper held her cooling body and wept, but even through his grief there was gratitude. Gratitude that she had not suffered, that she had been spared a long decline, that they had been granted so many years together. The funeral was enormous, attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming. Their children and grandchildren and even some great-grandchildren gathered to mourn and remember. Story after story was shared about Mariah's kindness, her wisdom, her dedication to family and education and community. But the story told most often was how she came to Wyoming, how she nearly died in a blizzard, how a cowboy had saved her, and how that meeting had changed both their lives forever. Jasper lived another 3 years, cared for by his children but never quite the same after Mariah's death. He had lost his partner, his other half, and the world seemed dimmer without her in it. But he did not waste those years in misery. He spent time with his family, told stories to his grandchildren, worked on the ranch as much as his aging body allowed. He lived, because that was what Mariah would have wanted. He passed in the spring of 1940, on a morning when the prairie was green and dotted with wildflowers. James found him in his bed, a peaceful expression on his lined face, and knew immediately that he was gone. On the nightstand was a photograph from their wedding day, Jasper and Mariah young and radiant with hope and love. Beside it was a worn piece of paper, a letter in Jasper's handwriting addressed to Mariah. James read it with tears streaming down his face, then shared it with his siblings. It was a love letter, thanking Mariah for every day of their life together, for their children and grandchildren, for the home they had built, for saving him from loneliness, just as surely as he had saved her from the snow. And it ended with a promise that he would find her again, wherever she had gone, because a love like theirs did not end with death. They buried him beside Mariah in the small cemetery outside Wheatland, under a headstone that read Jasper Quinn, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. May 17, 1874, April 3, 1940. Beside it, Mariah's stone. Mariah Quinn, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. March 3, 1861, December 15, 1937. And below both names an inscription, together forever from the snow to the stars. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through James to his children and grandchildren. The cabin where it all began was preserved, turned into a sort of shrine to Jasper and Mariah. And every winter, when the first big snow fell, the family would gather there and tell the story again. The story of how their family began, of a teacher who nearly froze and a cowboy who saved her, of a love that defied logic and time and built an empire of family and legacy. It became a legend in Wheatland, that story, told and retold until it took on mythical proportions. But at its heart it remained simple and true. A man had found a woman dying in the snow and had chosen to save her. She had chosen to live and then to love him. And from that moment, from that choice, had sprung an entire family, generations of lives that would never have existed if not for a blizzard and a kind heart and two lonely souls finding each other in the wilderness. It was a love story, pure and simple. The kind that reminded people why love mattered, why it was worth fighting for, why it endured beyond death and time. And in a harsh land where life was hard and death was often close, that story gave people hope. Hope that love could triumph, that happiness could be found in unexpected places. That one moment, one choice, one act of kindness could change everything. The story lived on, passed down through the decades, and Jasper and Mariah lived on through it. their love immortalized in memory and story and the faces of their descendants. They had started with nothing but each other and had built everything that mattered. They had loved deeply and well, and in the end, what more could anyone ask for? On cold winter nights in Wyoming, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled like it did on that fateful day in 1882, people would look out at the storm and think of them. Of Mariah collapsed in the snow and Jasper lifting her to safety. Of how close they had come to never meeting, never loving, never building the life that became the foundation for so many others. And they would be grateful, as Jasper and Mariah had been grateful, for every moment of warmth and love and connection in a world that could be harsh and cold and unforgiving. They would hold their loved ones a little closer and say a silent thank you to the teacher and the cowboy who had taught them all what love could be. The legacy of Jasper and Mariah Quinn was not just the ranch or the family or the stories. It was the reminder that love was always worth the risk, always worth the vulnerability, always worth the leap into the unknown. That sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, and that being saved and saving someone else were often one and the same. Their story ended as all stories do, with death. But it also never ended, because love like that does not die. It transforms, continues, lives on in every life it touches. In every grandchild who learned to read, in every cowboy who stopped to help a stranger, in every couple who looked at each other and saw home. Jasper had saved Mariah from the snow, but she had saved him from loneliness. They had saved each other, really, and in doing so had created something that would outlast them both. A legacy of love, written in the land and the lives they had touched, enduring as the Wyoming wind and as eternal as the stars that wheeled overhead on cold winter nights. And if sometimes, on the coldest nights when the snow fell thick and the wind howled, people thought they saw two figures walking hand in hand across the prairie, well, that was all right too. Some love stories never truly end. Some promises are kept beyond death. And some cowboys and their ladies dance forever under Wyoming stars, warm and safe and home at last.